got some brief introduction to LSAT studying. I drilled a little bit, but then I decided to focus on school, my GPA. And when I graduated, I had already known about this program since last year. When I graduated, I planned on signing up for this program. And oh yeah, that's where we are now. I've been using LSAT Unplugged over the summer. I'm hoping to take the November LSAT because that's the one I feel most comfortable taking. And I'm hoping to hopefully attend law school next fall 2022.
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad to have you on board, and I'm glad to help however I can. Any particular challenges that you're facing where I could support you?
So one of the biggest things that um, well, this one's a little more minor, but when it comes to the section I have the most, I guess, struggle with is reading comprehension. And reason being is that it's hard for me to not pay attention. That's not the word I want to use, but focus at times. My mind will wander. I'll be reading, I'll forget what I just read, and I'll have to reread. And that's something that's been giving me a hard time because the basic questions like what was the passage about, sometimes I'll blank because focusing and reading the passages is really difficult for me. When it comes to games are my best section. I feel like I'm interacting the whole time, but reading comprehension, that's the one hill that's been the hardest to like cross or get over.
I hear you on that. They're really good at making reading comp boring.
Yes.
So I hear you on that. And when they ask about like what was the focus of the passage, what was the main idea, what was the author's opinion, it's tough because it kind of directs you towards trying to summarize everything. And that's not really what you want to do. It's not about summarizing. It's about thinking to yourself, what was the main thing the author was trying to communicate? Why did they write this? If they could only leave you with one central idea, what would that be? And it's often summarized. It's often, I won't say summarized, it's often mentioned directly in the passage. There's oftentimes some kind of thesis statement. And you've just got to pull out that nugget.
Yeah. And I've like seen some of the videos, and one of the things I used to do, and thanks to you, I stopped. I used to highlight and take notes, and I realized even though I was doing that, it wasn't really helping me. It was just taking away from my time. So I took your advice and I started kind of trying just to mentally process the passages rather than wasting time highlighting, because I ended up highlighting half the passage at the end of the day, so it wasn't really helping me at all.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, the note taking, the highlighting, it takes a lot of time. The highlighting tool on the LSAT is actually kind of glitchy. It doesn't work that precisely, and so you don't want to be reliant upon it. So I'm glad you've changed your approach there. It sounds like what you're doing is you're finding ways to iterate and constantly improve to get through it more quickly, which is great. Now we want to help you hone in on exactly where's that key point where they give you what's the main idea. And if you, after you read the passage, you want to be able to walk away from it and say, okay, well, in these 3 to 5 words, I'm just going to lay out for myself why the author write this. What's the main point? And prephrase it so that when that question comes up, as it typically does, you'll already have your answer in mind.
Yeah. And, and that's so that's the, I guess it's one of the obstacles I've had, but the biggest one is a more general one, and I'm pretty sure you've spoke to hundreds of students who have this, is just the test just gives me anxiety. Like I'm so nervous for it, and it's one of those things where it's like this big giant I have to deal with. It's like standing in front of me, and sometimes I lose motivation at times to take it because I'm like, oh, what if I don't do well enough? What if I mess up? What if I get a really low score? And I guess sometimes it's I feel like it's better to study with motivation rather than fear. And sometimes I feel like I'm studying out of fear of not doing my best. And that's like my biggest issue in terms of the exam.
I hear you on that. Yeah, I mean, the LSAT's important. No two ways about it. And people don't always achieve their best. We hope that you will, of course. But sometimes you score your average, or sometimes you score below your average. And that's unfortunate, but the good news is that you can retake. it's never riding all on just one test date. Do you have a target test date in mind right now?
So my target test date is November. It was originally going to be October, but the first month of studying was kind of sporadic because I also work full time. Um, so I decided to move November so I could at least have maybe 3.5 months to study. And the way I kind of had planned out was depending, well, not depending, but I was hoping to take November and then January, depending on the score I get in November. A majority of the schools I'm applying to, their application deadlines are around February, March. So I want to say I'll be okay, but I'm not too sure.
Well, virtually every school will take January LSAT results. I can't think of a single one that doesn't. And reach out and ask if you're concerned about it. Just reach out and ask. And you look at when the January LSAT is, when do scores come back? They haven't released an exact score release date for January from what I've seen, but you can ask law schools, hey, like given your deadlines of February, whatever, will you take January results? They'll probably say yes. At least that way you can remove any concerns around that. I can tell you that January LSAT is right smack in the middle of the cycle. It's certainly not late. Mm-hmm. And so there's no real downside to taking January versus November. If you can get even just a point or two more, it'll make it well worth going for January. And sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. So my question was, would you recommend just taking January or seeing how it goes for November and then trying to retake in January?
If you're pretty close to your target score for November, I would take November just to see what happens.
Okay.
And that gives you multiple at-bats to get a higher score. I recommend that pretty much everybody retake. Why, unless you got a 180, why wouldn't you take it again and give yourself another shot to do better? And if you don't, no big deal. They only take the highest.
All right. And I guess my last question, in terms of a personal statement, I had a draft that I wrote when I was in the program, and the draft essentially had to do with my grandfather being a judge, and that inspired me to do law in the long run. But I have been seeing kind of the LSAT Unplugged post as to what personal statements, the routes to take for a personal statement. So it's kind of a long-winded way to say that, in terms of my personal statement, would it be wise to mention kind of my influences as to why I want to go to law school, or should I hone in on a specific experience or event?
I would always recommend honing in on a specific experience or event. Otherwise, you run the risk of trying to include everything and summarize, which means that you can't go as deep in any one area. The other thing I heard in what you said regarding like judge family influencing you, that's fine, but you want to make sure that you bring it back to yourself. So it's okay to mention that someone else inspired you, but you want to bring it back to talking about yourself, your motivations, your experiences. Otherwise, it ends up being more like a biography rather than more of like an autobiographical essay in nature. But again, I don't want to suggest that you try to be comprehensive. Rather, I'd suggest going deep with specifics.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to know. Thank you so much. I think that's all I have in terms of questions. Thank you so much for speaking with me. This really was helpful.
My pleasure, Angel. Of course, if you need anything else, feel free to reach out anytime.
Of course. Thanks so much, Steve.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.